Hello and welcome to the next lesson, where I quickly sum up what options I always change for final renderings in Render Setup for both render engines, Corona and V-Ray. Let's start from the Corona renderer. So before starting rendering previews, we need to change some options here to make it work as we wish. So I start by setting up the ratio of the image. Then in the Scene panel, I make sure I have the noising option turned on. I always use Corona High Quality and I leave the other options as they are. Now in the Performance panel, I make sure I have Fast Preview the Noise During Render option off. I simply don't like the results of this, and I have never really struggled with rendering previews with use of interactive rendering. Anyway, here from time to time I change screen size value depending on the scene, but only if I need to. And of course, noise level limit. If I don't care when the render will be finished, I leave it as 0, but most of the time I want to finish as soon as possible, so here I set different limits. For previews, I typically use noise 5%, most of the time it's good enough. But for finals, I go with lower values, 2% for really demanding renders and 3% for less demanding ones. And that's basically it. Let's talk about V-Ray now. So similarly as in Corona, I start with changing the ratio of the image. For work-in-progress images for the production stages, I use Progressive Image Sampler and default settings. And for noise threshold, as I mentioned in a previous lesson, 0.05 for previews and 0.007 or 0.005 for finals. Then I go to the color mapping and I leave Reinhardt, but I change burn value. I typically use 0.5 as a starting point. Then in GI for finals, I change the primary engine to irradiance map. For previews, I leave all this as it is. And then in the irradiance map settings, I change high to medium and I use values 70 and 35. I leave light cache options as they are. And then for V-Ray, I always add 2 render elements at the beginning. V-Ray denoiser and light mix to have it in a frame buffer from early beginning. And if I want to adjust the quality of this placement, I change this value, but again, I don't change it too often, only if there is a need for this. And that's basically it. At the end, let me show you how to save the preset, so you don't have to set it all up from scratch every time. Click here and choose Save Presets. We can name it, for example, High-Res Settings. We can choose what categories you want to include. I save all of them. And now, let me change something so I can show you that after we load the settings we've just saved, it will go back to previous options. Click here and choose Load Presets. Choose the proper file. We can choose what we want to load. And here we go. We have all settings automatically set up. And of course, the procedure for Corona is exactly the same. I hope all is clear for you now, and you can see that settings don't have to be really a big deal now in both render engines. In the next lesson, we'll talk about frame buffer options for Corona. See you there!